Thank you so much for, accepting the invite. Once Jamie told me that it's an option to talk with you and you can be a guest on the podcast, I was very excited because honestly, I've been dying for a while now to just be able to speak with a creative such as yourself, especially with someone involved in the horror genre. I'm a massive fan, and since Jamie told me about you, I watched your catalog. Obviously, got myself familiar with Ophelia as well. Which got me excited even more to talk with you. So, I would love to just have an open conversation with you. We are not, sure. We are not like following a typical question and answer type of formula. So, and for starters, I think it would be, firstly, I would say that you have a very good working cabinet, I would say, or a room or whatever place you're in. It's very creative. So I love the vibe. Are you doing some sort of music as well?
Well, I've been a musician since I was 18 and a half, I guess. I took piano lessons as a kid, but started my first band as a freshman in college and never really looked back. After college, I bought the equipment to start a recording studio. So I was not only recording my own music, but I was recording other bands and musicians and things. And I got to the point where, well into the band years, I wanted to start scoring film because, I recorded a lot of music myself, and I noticed the stuff I was doing by myself was pretty soundtrack oriented, even though that wasn't the intention. You could just kind of see that it would have been a natural progression. So when I couldn't get any gigs scoring other people's projects, I made a movie just so I could score it.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. So have you always been fascinated by, movies and films and being interested to record? Or was this something that, you developed throughout the years while being a musician? Or,
I think it was a little of both. Certainly being a musician and learning how to multi-track record. See, that was my favorite thing, was laying down a track, then laying down another track over it, then trying to figure out, how many tracks could I layer over top without it getting, messy or cluttered or what have you. So, that was exciting to me. But then I can also trace it back to, very early on, before I was, before the first band was even really gigging, a friend of mine introduced me to Pink Floyd's Piper at the Gates of Dawn. And that's the Pink Floyd's first album. And that was so unique that I really got the bug to learn how to record. And prior to that, I have a couple of experiences. When I was a kid, my mom took me to go see the original Halloween movie, and John Carpenter's score that changed everything. I remember that specifically, knowing how I felt when I heard that music. So then mostly dramas and thrillers and suspense and horror movies. Other movies have great score as well, but I know how I felt when that creepy music came on in a scary movie. Like, you knew something was going to happen. It made you feel a certain way, and I always wanted to do that. So it was kind of a perfect storm of, I knew how to record, I knew how to play instruments, I knew what I liked from movie soundtracks, and like I said, I made the first super low budget movie just so I could score it, and then made the second one after that so nobody would really remember the first one. And, I just kept getting a little bit better and a little bit better. And here we are.
Amazing. Yeah. And you mentioned something that I'll be very interested to explore. You mentioned that once you've heard the soundtrack, you knew what you want to do and what sort of emotion you would like to, to generate with your work as well. What would you say is the effect that you want to generate within the viewer? I guess it's a very, complex question to answer with words, but I would be interested to hear, what fascinated you with, especially with the horror genre and the soundtracks and the atmosphere that we get in this sort of media.
I feel like if you can immerse yourself as a viewer or as a filmmaker, you can immerse the viewer in this soundscape where it becomes another character in the movie. Like the two things that I really like to do, and Ophelia isn't exactly the perfect example of that because of how I chose to film it. But I still feel like you feel like you're in that house with the woman as she's going through what she goes through. But a lot of my older films, I did a lot of handheld camera work to where as the viewer, as the audience member, you feel like you're one of the group, one of the people in the movie, and you're in the scenes watching people and what have you. And that's one of the things that I think definitely as a camera person and cinematographer is like my style, is having the viewer feel like they're part of the group of people in the movie. But then when you take the sound and you can take them on an additional journey, a simultaneous journey with the sound effects, with the atmospherical noises, with the music itself, I think that's a great experience. And perfect examples are John Carpenter movies, but also, you can look back at Jaws and the minute that dude who, as soon as you heard that, you knew it was bad news. And if you like watching classic films, you can watch The Exorcist.
No.
And Tubular Bells is one of the main pieces of music in that. And that's very Carpenter-esque, although it came out before Carpenter's big run in the movies. But that's the same way. It's this really melodic piece of music that when it's linked up to the imagery of The Exorcist, you feel it. Like it became another character in the movie.
Yeah, and I think, you're bringing such a good point to everything, because especially when it comes to horror movies, I've always thought that the sound design of everything is such a crucial and significant part of the whole experience. And I sort of found out that the thing that scares me the most and that immerses me the most is exactly the sound. And, just in many movies, when you just hear the footsteps going on some wooden board, or just the main antagonist just doing noises around the house or whatever. And this is really the aspect that immerses you the most, really. You sort of answered this question in terms of Halloween being your, the first movie that sort of ignited your passion towards this sort of art. But what would you say are some, other titles or directors or whatever the case might be in terms of names that has sort of been crucial and significant in the process of your development?
I like all genres. I mean, I started making horror movies just because you could do it on a low budget and still sell it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's always a market for, if it's a completed movie, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
You have a couple of cool scares and gross, special effects or whatever. You can sell it. You know, the number varies. The amount of dollars you can get for it varies, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't want to sit around and wait to hopefully do a movie. So I did, the first one was like $2,000.
Mm-hmm.
Me and a friend had a couple cameras. We got a couple of Home Depot work lights, put some gels over them, and, made a movie and just kind of learned. And the second one, a little more, $10,000, which is still ridiculous, but,
Mm-hmm.
Enough to buy food, pay the college kids, a few $100s to give us a couple weeks over the summer, and, got a little bit better. And then, it really started jumping up at that point, nothing major budget wise, 100,000, 200,000, 500,000. But, it was the journey. It was the progress. It was learning, what works and what doesn't work, and how to think quickly. Because when you're working on a low budget, you have to roll with the punches. Things go wrong all the time, and you can't just throw money at the problem. You have to be creative, and you have to figure it out, whether you're planning on shooting 5 pages at, this one location, and you get there and they're like, oh, sorry, our pipes burst. You got to figure something out, because you got, 10, 20, 30 people standing around ready to shoot, and you have to disappear for, 30 minutes and rewrite 5 pages. And when you do that enough times, very little bothers you once the train starts rolling, So I look at the entire journey and the entire process as it was step by step by step. I got lucky enough to meet a couple of really prominent screenwriters in the film business. And it started with, during making the first movie, my mentor, who I had, met on that first movie, was a Michigan State University professor, film professor and screenwriting professor. And he was Sam Raimi's professor when Sam was at Michigan State University. And Sam Raimi's a pretty well-known director with, many, many major Hollywood movies.
Especially a classic horror one too.
Right.
Yeah.
And Ash versus Evil Dead, and, lots of TV shows, him and his producing partner, Rob Tappert, Hercules and Xena, and, lots of good stuff. Well, his brother, Ivan, who's a screenwriter and an emergency room doctor, I met through the MSU professor, and we became friends and started writing together. And he taught me a lot. My screenwriting professor friend laid the foundation. He taught me pacing and, a lot of different things. And then working with Ivan and knowing, he has several major movies that got produced with his brother, watching his work ethic and him trusting me to say, we would meet and he would, I would have pages done. He'd be like, okay, this is great. This is great. Now let's take these 2 characters and combine them into one.
Wow.
And you're like, Okay. So I would go home for a week and do that. And then we would meet. And he's like, okay, that's good. That's good. Now, let's take these 3 scenes and turn it into one scene and get rid of this character altogether.
Wow.
So learning how to do that, you had to really separate things that you felt like you were married to in the script. Like you knew that it was the greatest thing you ever wrote. And you have to learn to detach yourself to certain things, not all things, because if your gut tells you something's great, fight for it. But that gave me this whole new writing perspective. And then I met a gentleman named Chuck Farr, who's a former Navy SEAL who wrote the movie Navy SEALs with Charlie Sheen.
Wow. And
he wrote Hard Target with Jean-Claude Van Damme. He wrote The Jackal with Bruce Willis and Richard Gere, Mission to Mars, Red Planet and Virus. We became partners, and he left Hollywood and moved to Northern Michigan, and a friend of a friend introduced us, and we became good friends. And this is when Michigan had a film incentive, a pretty robust film incentive. And we spent several years putting together all new scripts and packaged films with actors and, getting financing together. And then sadly, the governor at that time got rid of the film incentive. So that all fell apart. But my experiences with Chuck was yet another layer of tricks of the trade, different things. There's a lot of great writers out there, but there's not a lot of writers who have written, $100 million, $200 million box office movies. I think one of Ivan's movies, Spiderman 2 or 3, I mean, you're talking $600, $700, $800 million at the box office. And, Chuck with The Jackal, that was a massive movie. So you take everything from these people, you try to keep true to yourself, but you learn from these people. And I'll tell you this, even though we're not even really talking about it, but Chuck was great with one-liners of wisdom, where, he would just say this one thing, but it could apply to everything in your writing situation. And I'll put this out there for any screenwriters who may watch this, if you're writing and you've come to a little roadblock and you're not really sure, how to get out of this corner you just painted yourself into, his advice is have 2 guys burst through the doors with shotguns shooting up the place. And it's not that specific. Like, he does that because he writes action movies, but that can just mean disrupt the situation. Have, you got two kids on the couch, making out, watching TV or whatever. And you're like, okay, well, where do I go from here? Well, have the parents of the girl burst through the door unexpectedly and send it into a whole new, twist. And you can do it with just about anything. Like, just have 2 guys burst through the door with shotguns, metaphorically, and you're in a whole nother direction, ready to go. I can give you a million of those, but
that's such a good advice, by the way. It's so fascinating how, as you said it, something that is so simply put is actually so complex and makes such a big sense, actually. And I would love to go, deeper into the whole creative process that is, being utilized, especially when it comes to the horror genre. And I would love to hear your perspective in terms of, what's the process of you from getting an influence or getting a simple idea for a movie and developing it through a whole concept? Like,
Right.
is it intuitive? Is it more of a calculated approach where you know that you need to undertake a certain steps with it? Or yeah, just walk me through that.
If I want to try to make it myself, I take this one approach. If I just want to write a screenplay that either maybe I can do way down the line or sell it or get somebody else to produce it or what have you, then that's a different approach. Like, what I mean by that is, again, one of the things that I learned very early on was learning to write what you could actually shoot.
Oh,
like if you write a movie that takes place, and you're living in the United States, but you write a movie that takes place in Greece and this restricted location and has 150 people and helicopter explosions and world dominance and all that. That's going to be hard for an independent filmmaker to actually make themselves. It doesn't mean it's not a great idea and doesn't deserve to be written, but you have to know from day one, are you writing something that you want to go shoot, or are you writing something for a spec screenplay or something like that? And if it's something that I'm going to shoot, I kind of reverse engineer the whole beginning section, meaning what people do I have access to? What locations do I have access to? What kind of equipment do I have available to me? What can I write with those parameters? Now, with Ophelia, I've always been fascinated by psychiatric asylums from the past, late 1800s, early 1900s. Things were really weird in those places at that time. And I had met a gentleman that bought the remaining buildings of an asylum in southeastern Michigan. And he's like, of course you can use my building. So I was like, okay, I have that. And then in mid-Michigan, there's a location that's a giant 3-story manor that was owned by a wealthy family in the 1800s that they donated to the city of Lansing, and it is still furnished like it's the late 1800s, early 1900s. Mm-hmm. So, okay, I have those two things. From there, I developed this whole 3-movie universe based around those two locations. And I created a backstory of what I wanted to do. The doctor that was hired to run this facility back in the 1800s and what have you. So then, develop that backstory. And then I wrote the first screenplay, then started working on the second screenplay and thought, instead of trying to go out and, put pitch decks together, lookbooks, try to, raise a little funding or whatever, the gentleman that I wrote Seven Cells with, Robert McCann, we said, why don't we do a proof of concept? Why don't we actually shoot a short film and use that to try to get funding? And so we did, had a few $1,000s. A lot of that went towards the location and food and stuff like that, but had enough to, there was only 3 people on the crew. There was me, there was an audio guy, Curtis, who's also a great producer and assistant director, and a makeup lady. And Bob was there as well. Robert, Bob McCann was there, where he figured out how to get our GoPro camera that we used for the face cam to Bluetooth to a tablet, so we could actually set up the shot, and kind of keep an eye on things, and we could play back the shot on that as well. So minimal people, one location, that's something that you can shoot. And that's the trick. If I would have wrote Ophelia or Bob and I would have wrote Ophelia with, 11 characters in it, and it started in, an apartment, and then, had these different quick scenes on their way to get to the house, and, yada, yada, yada. It would have been very, very challenging to shoot with little money. But one person, two people in a single location, that's doable. Yeah. So that's the process of getting that stuff going. Then once you're in production, it depends on if you're a large movie or a small movie or what have you. But, you get the actors that you can trust and feel good with for the budget that you have, and you really work with them to get the best that you can do. And another thing I recommend to a lot of filmmakers is try to edit your own stuff, especially early on, because you'll get a gauge on how challenging it is to edit something in general. But as you get better at that, if you're a camera person and a director, you kind of start directing what you want to edit. And that's really a big trick, a big secret, is I can now just shoot the shots that I know I want to compile on the editing timeline. And that's because of years and years and years of editing. I edit movies and commercials and industrial pieces and interviews and, all sorts of stuff. So, again, it's kind of the perfect storm of everything, being a musician and meeting the MSU professor and Ivan and Chuck, and slowly building up, making a low budget movie, then another, and then, just keeping busy and keeping creating stuff and getting better and better and better and learning what works and what doesn't work. And, I don't know that my path, how it would have worked out if I had all the money in the world to make the first thing. Would I be the same person that I am now? And I don't think that's the case. I think I think in a different manner, and I believe that it's all. It took a while, but I believe it's all coming together. I've written 10 screenplays over the last 7 years that I believe are all very producible, high concept, quality screenplays. And now I'm back ready to make film. I wanted to learn. I made a bunch. I worked on some other people's projects. And then I took about 7 years to really hone the craft of writing.
It seems it's a tendency that if it's a very banal saying, but if you want to be good at something, you need to spend what was it, 10,000 hours on it. So
that's true.
It makes all the sense, and I guess being involved in music before really helped you to develop this mentality and to sort of apply to this sort of creative activity as well. And in terms of, writing and developing the concept in your head, something that I've always been curious about is, because in the end of the day, the horror movie needs to be scary. It needs to be atmospheric. It needs to be eerie. It needs to evoke this sort of emotion within the viewer. So, as the creator of this concept, how do you make things scary? Like, do you utilize your own perception in terms of what would make you scared? Or do you sort of try to have an objective idea and try to do what you think would be scary for the viewer?
Well, I think early on, you're just trying to emulate things that you enjoyed. Me with the John Carpenter movies and the Wes Craven movies, and the pretty so-so horror movies of the 80s and early 90s and stuff. You see this certain type of kill scene, and you're like, oh, that was neat, and you try to incorporate something similar into yours. And I think that's good, because it's like being in a band and doing a cover song of a song or artist that you really like. You have to figure out the chord progression and arrangement and all that kind of stuff. And emulating those kind of scary scenes in a horror movie is very, very similar to where it's like, okay, I wonder how they did that. I could try it doing this and this and this, and this is really, really one of the most elaborate and gory things that we ever did was in a movie called The Invitation. We buried an older woman in the ground up to her neck and ran her over with an industrial-sized snowblower.
Nice.
And it just, blew all over. Yeah. It had like this big screen on the, a plastic on the front of it, and I had the nozzle turned at it, and we threw 10 pounds of ground deer meat and broken up styrofoam cups to look like the, bone, and some pieces of wig and stuff like that. And you're just carefully cutting back. You show her on, screaming, then you show the thing getting closer, then her closer screaming. And then all of a sudden there's like up on and the fun thing was figuring out how I wanted to do that. And what I did was I dug a giant hole, like a 6 foot by 6 foot square that was down about 3 feet, and we put her, she just sat comfortably in a chair, able to move and whatever. I took 2 giant pieces of 4 by 8, 2-inch thick foam, and I cut little notches, little half moon shaped notches on both pieces, and then slid it together around her neck, put a brown bath towel around her neck, and then put dirt everywhere around the towel so you didn't see anything.
Wow.
And that was how I was able to pull off, a pretty horrifying and grotesque scene in a scary movie. It was just challenging yourself. A lot of the other ones I've done, I've tried to come close to this movie or that movie, and then eventually you don't restrict yourself with that, or it's all in you anyways. And you just come up with stuff and say, can I actually do that? How would I do that? And the more money you get, you can hire people to figure that out for you.
Yeah.
I always have to know if I could do it before I would trust somebody else to do it. I just like figuring that out.
That sounds as an essential point, really. Okay, so as obviously, being the man behind the camera when it comes to this sort of movies and this sort of content, Does this affect your ability to enjoy a horror movie? Like, does it still work for you, or by being a director and seeing a scene and you're more like analytically assessing it and be like, oh, I know how, in reality, how they made that happen? Or are there still movies that get you as a viewer?
There was probably a period where it was tough to enjoy. I enjoyed scary movies because I had already seen them. They were my favorites. Like, watching new ones for a little while was challenging because I was thinking, I know how they did that. I wonder how they did that, But it wasn't a long period. Like, eventually, and I should probably say relatively quickly, I was able to get back to just separating myself as a viewer and immersing myself in it. Now, I will say that the filmmaker has a harder job with me to keep me in there. But unless something happens that really takes me out of the moment or out of the movie because I couldn't go along with it or believe it, or I'm pretty good. I can enjoy movies again.
That's nice. That's nice. And what about the content that you have produced? Like, I'm curious, for example, you're on set and you have developed this very elaborated set, and people in makeup, and it's very atmospheric and it's very eerie. So, for example, when you're being on set, do you sort of get the feeling as a viewer that you want to invoke within the viewer? Or, for example, when you're watching the finished product, does it invoke some sort of emotion within you as a viewer rather than as a creator? Or, you being directly involved in it, it doesn't really work like that?
I've been pretty fortunate to where several of the projects I've been able to actually film in pretty creepy places. And I think that's been a lucky circumstance where you're able to keep the actors kind of engaged in being scared when you're in a scary place. Now, you don't want to make it dangerous. You don't want to, just turn the lights out and people are walking around bumping into stuff and, but where we shot Ophelia, it's a 180, 70-year-old mansion.
Wow.
And, it just feels like you can feel the history. You can feel there's something in the house. I never felt in danger. I never felt, like something was going to get me, but I did feel like, there was just something heavier than, a normal situation. And in a positive way, like I think anybody who believes in this stuff, there's many that don't, but anybody who believes in, potential paranoia stuff and, or paranormal stuff. And, you kind of get a feeling like when you go into an abandoned asylum, it's pretty heavy. Like, when I went to the one in southeastern Michigan, like, you walk in there and it's just heavy. Like, this, at one point, it was the largest asylum in the country, and it housed some of the worst of the worst.
Wow.
And it felt you could feel it.
Yeah.
So when you're in places like that, like, this movie, Acts of Death, we shot on Michigan State University campus in an old theater building. It's called the Fairchild Theater. And there was, all sorts of rumors of after-hour noises and things. And they allowed us to shoot there over Christmas break. And the type of movie that it was, we couldn't start shooting till it got dark. So we're there from, 5 o'clock in the afternoon until 5 a.m. every day. So from midnight to 5 a.m, you start hearing some pretty interesting things in a, 150-year-old theater on, a very old campus. So whether it happened or didn't happen, it could have been the steam pipes. It could have been, the old building creaking, whatever it is, you can get yourself pretty fired up.
Yeah.
So as a team, a director and actors and crew and stuff, we use that to our advantage to, remain not laughing all the time. Keep yourself in, like, we still joked a lot. We still had a great time and all that stuff. But when the cameras are about to roll, you need to get there, and you need, so certain locations, whether they're cemeteries or, asylums or old houses with a history, you can create a vibe that you should be able to get onto the screen.
Wow. You actually, touched on the next question that I wanted to ask you as well, in terms of, the belief in supernatural. Because I'm curious, whether you believe in that, whether you don't, because I imagine this is, quite a big part of what you do in the end of the day. Like, you have to have some sort of, approach towards the aspect that you want to portray.
Well, I believe in the supernatural, and I don't want to say, that it doesn't exist, or that, I feel like, especially when you go into places with history, I feel like there's a heaviness, there's a presence, there's something. And, as far as the extreme where you're talking, demonic possession and, I don't know how far, I like being scared by some of that stuff. That's the good part about going to a movie like The Nun or, some of those movies, is just, suspending your disbelief and being okay with, all right, give me what you got. And if they can pull it off and be not cheesy, I think they can utilize that, the fear of the unknown. And that's to me what a lot of the good paranormal stuff really is the fear of the unknown. And I feel like it doesn't just have to be the unknown of, is there something, is there a parallel universe, or is there an afterlife, or is there, ghosts traipsing around your house or whatever. I think you can also answer that question, or maybe even ask that question as a filmmaker, with light and shadow. Like, one of the things that I like about the Ophelia short film is what you don't see.
Yes.
Going through the house and, having a flashlight as the only source of light in the entire house. So as you're, holding a camera and, whatever, you only see that spotted moment. And then it's dark again. So did I just see something? Was something just there? And that's really the thing to explore, in my opinion, is not, a ghost running around, but just creating visual suspense of what you see and what you don't see, and noises, and kind of go that way, versus if you saw a ghost all the time, it probably wouldn't be scary anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And you've mentioned something that I very much relate to when it comes to what truly fascinates people with the horror genre. And this is I've always at least, explain it to myself like that, is the fear of unknown. Because I found that, always the scariest part in movies for me, just the little signs, the things that make you think that there's something, but you don't see it. And as you said, if you see the demon or the ghost all the time, it just stops being scary. But if it's just the noises, if it's just the shadows, that's what makes it very, I guess, fascinating, really.
I agree.
So, I want to come back a little bit when it comes to the process of developing an idea, because you've mentioned that it's very often for creators, including yourself, to work alongside other people and to develop ideas together. Can you walk me through that as well? Because I can imagine it's quite difficult to first find a person who properly understand your concept and what you want to achieve with your idea. And then the whole dynamic in terms of, you both working towards perfecting a certain concept can be quite challenging. And I guess it takes effort to, sort of adjust yourself to that.
Well, if we're talking about developing an idea into, something that can be made, that process, for me, I always like taking the simplest of little questions and turning it into the foundation for, the whole thing. And, I don't want to give away any secret recipes for, my Coca-Cola or anything like that. But what I'll say is just the little germ of an idea. You see a road sign, like, okay, here's one that I can give you.
Okay.
So Ivan Raimi, Sam's brother, and I were over at my mentor, Bill Vincent, his house, and we decided to go for a walk. And a little ways down the road, because Bill lives on a farm in mid-Michigan, like 10 acres and what have you. And so we're walking down a road that's not really populated, but on the corner was a sign that said future home of whatever funeral parlor.
Wow.
And we're like, well, or whatever funeral home. And we were like, well, this is a really weird place to put a funeral home, and then we just started, like, because our brains work this way. Well, what if it was nefarious? What if it was for a different reason? What if they're building this, as a cover for something, or, whatever. And then it was like, okay, well, what would that cover be? And it was like, okay, well, what if it's, this, and this? And then he would say, well, what if it was this? And then we would be like, okay. And, eventually, by the time we made it back to the house, we had an idea for a movie called The Funeral Home that we changed its name after that. But we had basically a generic overview of what could be a pretty interesting screenplay. Mm-hmm. So when we got back, we told Bill, the professor, the idea, and he's like, well, yeah, let's do it. So we hashed out over the next couple of weeks a treatment, and then, you know, Bill wrote a first draft of our treatment, and I rewrote that, and then it became Ivan and I over the next 2 years meeting, you know, every other week, where, like I told you, he would say, okay, well, let's do this. Let's do this. Take this character and do this. And, you know, and it all started with walking down the road and seeing a sign in a vacant lot. To elaborate on that, for me specifically, when I have an idea, what I do now is I will write down a bunch of things that I think have to be in this movie. You know, and just lay out some parameters. Then I know at the very least there's the main character and a couple of characters that they need to interact with. So I'll have that kind of foundation. Then what I'll normally do is I'll make a poster of the movie.
Oh, wow, interesting.
Like all these different posters. Well, Seven Cells was done by a friend. I've done a couple other ones prior to that, but you know, this one, it becomes a kind of a creative moment for me where I can get a visual going for the type of movie that I want, and gives my brain some time to like digest everything and maybe start formulating some stuff. Then I'll write a beat sheet. And a beat sheet for me is basically, you know, you have the structure of the opening scene and the catalyst and the end of the first act, beginning of the second act, the midpoint of the second act, the turning point that propels you into the third act. And so I'll just write out this numbered thing where I'll have like 1 through 5, and then inciting incident, then 6 through 10, and it's not hard and fast. You don't have to stay to that. It just gives me a structure to then go, okay, the big thing that's going to propel this into the second act is when so-and-so does this. So I'll write that in there. Then I have, from the opening scene, I got to come up with what's the incident that, you know, caused the whole movie to get started. My guy walks into a bank and somebody starts robbing it, and now my guy is in the middle of, you know, so you have that. Then I know I have to go from that to the turning point, and I've got roughly 18 pages to do it. Wow. Okay, so I need to hit this, and I need to hit this, and I need to hit this. That's how I like to lay out the beat sheet, or a more formulaic treatment, so that when I start writing the screenplay, I don't have any major hiccups. Like some people like to just start. They're like, oh. And for me, like Chuck can do that. You know, Chuck Farr, the Navy SEAL guy, he can start on page 1. He may have some mental notes. He may have some notes. But, you know, there are people who just go. They just start. Yeah. And then there's people like me who I really like. I like to know how I'm going to get there. You know, so I spend as much time on that beat sheet that some people do on just writing the screenplay, because I'll flush a lot of things out. I'll make sure I have, you know, there's key dialogue that I want people to say in this scene and in this scene and in this scene. And, you know, I'll make sure it's all there. But the cool thing is it helps me to not get slowed down by if I'm just doing the screenplay and I hit a roadblock. I'm stuck. But if I'm doing a beat sheet, I can just say, okay, I'm stuck here for a second, but I do know that to start the third act, I want this to happen and this to happen and this to happen. Then I can work on that a little bit. And then I'll have some parameters to go back and say, okay, I now know this guy's going to live. These two people are not, whatever. So from getting here to here, I got to go to this place. This has got to be said. These people need to meet. And for me, that's the process. Wow,
that's so interesting. I've always been trying to just imagine what this process is like. So it's very fascinating just to hear all of that from you. Okay, so in terms of this sort of creative process, we have the start, everything beginning from a simple idea to to the production and editing and so on. For you personally, what would you say is the most satisfying part of the process? What brings you the most joy of? And I guess it's everything all at once with different reasons and so on and so forth. But what are the the pinpoints that you can give?
Well, I believe it was Hitchcock that said his favorite thing was coming up with the idea and writing it. Everything after that was work. And he's right. Making a film is hard work, or getting it in the can, so to speak. Then post-production is tedious and hard work. And every time I do it, I say, this is my favorite, or this is my favorite. Again, I think the fact that, for the first 5 movies, I was, one of the writers. I usually collaborated with either Bill Vincent, the MSU professor, or my friend Eric F. Hill, who's one of the most sought after grips in Hollywood now. We did a lot of the early stuff together. And that process was always great because you're on your own time, you're with your buddies, you're creating, you're coming up with something. There were challenges, especially in the early days, trying to learn how to write something that's at least on a certain level. Not a lot of people, the first thing they ever write is the greatest thing they'll ever write. So that process was always enjoyable. But then getting into filming, especially in the early days, it's almost, it's like combat. It's like combat in the sense that you're with this tight unit of people. Once it starts, you can't stop. You can't just throw your hands up in the air and say, well, you have 18 days or whatever your schedule is, and you have to shoot 6 pages a day or 7 pages a day, whatever the number is, you have to do it. You can't stop. There's money at stake. Even in the early days when it wasn't a lot of money, there were still people that were volunteering their time, or they needed something out of this too. So they're working with you, and whatever the case is, after a couple of days and you haven't slept, and you're away from home and you got your blinders on. Okay, I got, today has got to be this. And, by the end of all of that, you're so tight with those people. And when it's over, it's such a bizarre feeling that it's really hard to express the emptiness of when production wraps, because these people are now your family. And then you got to go into post-production. And that's a very, very painstaking process of, hundreds and hundreds of scenes and shots and choices and hours and hours and hours of footage to go through. And you're putting this puzzle together. And then once the puzzle's together, then you gotta deal with the dialogue. You gotta get that, either synced from another source, or you gotta start crossfading and blending and, mixing and all that stuff. Then you're dealing with sound effects and atmosphere, and then you're dealing with score, and that's such a daunting task to know, okay, I have a blank editing timeline, and someday down the road I've got to have 100 minutes of finished movie.
Wow.
But all you can do is tackle it. You do a minute this day, you do 2 minutes the next day, you have a great day and you do 4 minutes, and eventually you're like, oh, I'm a third of the way into the rough edit. And then you start hitting those milestones, and then you start seeing things that are like exactly how you wanted it. And those are the little nuggets that help you keep going. And, like with Ophelia, I did a theatrical mix, a surround sound mix.
Oh, wow.
And sitting in the theater with 50 people that were all my friends, and, some people that were involved with it and what have you, and mentors and whatever. And watching them watch and listen to the finished product was what it was all about.
Wow. That's amazing. When it comes to creating an idea and creating a concept about a movie, do you tend to sort of integrate some sort of an underlying missive towards, the whole story's point and so on? Or is it all about, creating the most immersive experience? Just, I'm interested to hear your perspective as, a creator of content like that.
I've done a lot of different screenplays. Like, I haven't only written horror. I've got a screenplay called Seasons in the Sun about a little girl who gets sick, and she ends up being the strongest person in the entire movie. And she teaches people, to enjoy every minute, and, that kind of approach.
Yeah.
And I've got a family-oriented rock and roll comedy movie about, a 40-plus-year-old guy who loses his job. And this is back around 2010 or so, when the economy crashed, and, the whole family was about to lose their house. The wife could barely get a job as a waitress. They're barely hanging on. And he decides to put the band back together, his band from college. And, as he's trying to do this, it doesn't exactly work out the way that he wanted, because one person had passed away. Another person was having some addiction problems, and they couldn't rely on him. So the son-in-law, joins the band, and, just all sorts of interesting dynamics to where you can really boil it down to, it's a movie about friends and family and getting a second chance to chase your dreams. So it's pretty much about me, but, you take some liberties with some stuff and what have you. The movie Seven Cells, you can kind of break it down to where I've always had this, asylums and psychiatric hospitals really scare me. Like, what if, and maybe it's back from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or, some other things, to where, what if you're wrongfully admitted to a hospital, and because of the tranquilizers and different things they're giving you, you don't get out.
Mm-hmm.
And you just become what they thought you originally were.
Yes.
That scares me.
Mm-hmm.
So you can boil these things down to kind of like Acts of Death, for example,
Mm-hmm.
was the original thought was, what would I do if somebody like really did something bad to my daughter?
Yeah.
That's, she was maybe 4 when I wrote it,
Mm-hmm.
or came up with the idea. So, it stemmed from there. And
Okay.
I think most good ideas, you can boil it down to something very simple, whether it's the theme of it or the log line that you use or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You should be able to pare it down to something very, very quickly explainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this makes all the sense. In the beginning of the conversation, you obviously mentioned that in the start of the creative process, you kind of decide, as you've mentioned, whether you want to write a movie that is to be shot, or just to express your grand ideas, I guess. And I'm interested to hear, have you wrote a script for a movie that at some point you would like to be done, given the circumstances that you can operate with all the budget that you need and, all of that?
Yeah, 7 Cells is one of them.
Amazing.
And part of the, like I said, I have 7. I have
Mm-hmm.
7 that I've written that have not been shopped around. They haven't, been pitched or packaged or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're all larger budgets, a couple million, a few million.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, those were written kind of as a hybrid of, I can't really do it for $50,000,
Yeah.
but I don't need 100 million to do it either.
Mm-hmm.
So, those were all done to be able to be made, but just not right this minute.
I'm very interested to also hear your perspective in terms of, the different creative outlets that are music and films. For you as a creator, can you let me know what are the differences for you between these creative outlets, and what are the main specifics for you when it comes to approaching either of them?
I don't know that there's a set approach. Sometimes I'll watch it, like if I'm doing it myself, if I'm going to score it,
mm-hmm.
I'll watch a scene that I've done and I'll start noodling around on the keyboard and start getting some sounds, and this would be cool with strings, or this would be cool with, this pulsating sound or whatever. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'll take a break from editing and I'll just start recording music for a couple of days. Mm-hmm. And, I'll take the vibe of what I wrote, what I shot, what I'm editing, and I'll just create different pieces of music and then figure out where they can go mm-hmm. after the fact. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I've worked with other people who've scored, movies that I'm editing or producing or whatever, and they give me, 20 pieces of music that are 16 tracks, stems of horns and this, and it's just a file. And they're like, I trust you, put it where you think, and you can delete the horns and the strings and just use this and this, or you can raise this, So I'll go and I'll figure out where I think it works best. And then I really don't need 16 instruments going here. I only need 4. Let's use these 4 here, but then I can have it kind of come back around again later where I pull out these 2, but add 3 other tracks. So it's still the similar vibe, but it's different instrumentation. So again, to me, that is one of the fun parts, is getting to the sound design and, the mixing and stuff, because again, that's what I did for, a decade and a half. Was I loved mixing. Like, as much as I loved recording and layering stuff, all that was done just so I could then sit and mix.
Wow.
I was more of a hands-on mixer than, getting into Pro Tools and just assigning faders to do this and that. To me, part of the performance was actually the live mixing. And did I get that up fast enough? And was this too loud? And, pan this left and have some reverb. And, that to me was the exciting part for a long time in my life. So getting to that point in making the movies, and again, that's one of the things I like about Ophelia, is if you put on headphones and watch the short and listen, it sounds really cool.
Yes, I completely agree with that. This is actually, what really impressed me, because, as I've said, probably the biggest part for having a proper horror experience for me is exactly the sound design. And when I was watching the short, and as I was listening to it, was like such a big part of the whole experience. It was so cool. So
thank you.
Of course. So speaking about the failure, I read that, obviously you're working on sequels, and this won't be the only installment. In terms of that. So can you tell anything about what can be expected about the story? Obviously, I know it's a very tricky question, but yeah.
Yeah, sure. Creating a horror universe, like one of the things that I appreciate about some of the stuff that Blumhouse, which is a great horror production scenario, like they had some things that kind of fed off each other. And some of the cool stuff I think does play into different movies within the confines. So that's what I did with the Ophelia character, is, like I said, create this universe based around this fictitious asylum that housed the worst of the worst. And each movie that I've written or am writing, both on my own and with my partner, Robert McCann, takes place within this universe. So there can be some crossover. If I'm doing a found footage movie, in this creepy house, some of the backstory can be relevant in a traditional shot scary movie where it's in the hospital now of the doctor, and you meet different characters, yet it's all still kind of playing off each other. So that's what's in the works right now.
Oh, that sounds so interesting. I'm very much looking forward to see, how this will develop with the time. And to sort of finish here, I'm really curious, and I'll be so interested to hear, like, as a horror movie fan, and as someone who appreciates this genre, what for you are like your favorite horror movies, directors, books, like authors? Like, I would love to hear your preferences.
When I was a little kid, I really liked Alfred Hitchcock short stories. Read a couple Stephen King books early on. One of the first books I bought with my own money was the Amityville Horror.
Wow, yeah.
My grandma bought me Jaws, which was very, very long. It was a very, very long book. So that was some of the early stuff. I enjoyed reruns as a kid, staying home from school and watching the Munsters and Addams Family and, that kind of stuff. But getting into the movies, like I said, John Carpenter's Halloween opened the door. I love all his movies. You can definitely tell they're his. Wes Craven too. Really enjoyed some bizarre movies from the 80s and what have you, like The Fun House was a really bad but great one. So that kind of stuff was my influence. And as far as what I go back to, like every year, no matter what, I can watch the original Halloween, the original Halloween Part 2. Those two I can watch every year, no matter what. I did enjoy the Blair Witch Project when it first came out, just because it was unique, even though a movie called The Last Broadcast did it first. And they don't get as much love as they should. But it was just, it let you know that you could do it a different way. And then when Scream came out, that kind of changed everything again, to where you can kill off the main character in the first 7 minutes of the movie. And Hitchcock did that obviously with Psycho. It was longer than 7 minutes, of course, but nobody really expected Janet Leigh, her character, to not make it through the whole movie. And that was kind of a shocker. And so I appreciate Hitchcock. I watch, Strangers on a Train and Rope and North by Northwest and Vertigo and The Birds and Psycho. Like, he's the master. I can also attribute quite a bit to The Twilight Zone. Really loved watching those old reruns. Rod Serling had a second show called The Night Gallery, which I think personally I find creepier than The Twilight Zone, even though The Twilight Zone was extremely groundbreaking and great. But, I'm sure I'm missing a ton. I even like crazy movies like Lake Placid, a giant alligator that was just, it was creepy and fun and, so.
Yeah. And what are your general thoughts on the whole trend right now with, sequels of well-established franchises, with the newest Exorcist and with Evil Dead and all of these?
Well, Evil Dead's another one, I should say. I can watch the Evil Dead movies over and over and over.
So good,
but Sam's middle movies I really like A Simple Plan. Is such a great Sam Raimi movie. That's one I can watch over and over and over and over. But then I like Dodgeball, and I like, There's Something About Mary, and I like Talladega Nights and Anchorman and Step Brothers and, Happy Gilmore. But as far as the trend, I'll say it's tough because it's easy for us to say, leave the legacy alone. But the people who own the intellectual property, if they need to or can make a living off of, selling certain rights and things, they should be able to, It's been a long time since the original Halloween. And if John Carpenter and Deborah Hill's estate can still make money off of that, they should, because they gave us something special, and they should not be penalized for doing something great that people can still generate revenue off of. So as a filmmaker, to me, it's no different than when a musician sold the rights to their songs when they were a kid, fighting their whole life to get them back. and then being able to make money off of their old songs, I don't have a problem with that.
That's such a great perspective, to be fair. And last question, regardless of the genre, like what's the most recent best movie that you've watched? Like what was the last thing that you watched and that you really liked?
I'm going to say Megan.
Nice. Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting. And it was a touch on, where AI can go wrong. And it's really poignant now. But I mean, I like a lot of movies. Like I don't have to love a movie to like and enjoy watching a movie. Like I have friends and things that it's like every movie has to be the greatest movie they ever watched. That's not sustainable. Like you can enjoy something for what it is and still enjoy the great thing that you love when it's time, So it's with people complaining about certain Marvel or DC movies versus other Marvel or DC movies. It's like, they don't all have to be Endgame.
Absolutely.
They can't. You can't have a 900-person, 30-minute finale in every movie. So be okay with Black Widow. Be okay with these certain approaches, and just know that when you get that other thing, then you can love it. But
absolutely,
I thought Megan was great. I like Blumhouse's approach to the movies they're backing and putting out and stuff. Just like I loved Ghost House, which is Sam Raimi and Rob Tappert's company, when they were really active in putting movies out under their label, because they have pride and they have a way that they like doing things and putting their name on things, and it's and Wes Craven too. You knew that it may not be the greatest movie ever,
but to do it fun,
it was going to be solid. Everybody likes what they like, so you can't love every movie by every filmmaker except maybe Tarantino, and then there's still it's because he hasn't done 47 movies.
Yeah, exactly.
When you do 10, you can really, 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 really hyper focus on making it, the best thing it can be. So there you go.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. I'll stop here because otherwise I can ask you a million other questions that I would love to hear your perspective on. But thank you so much for your time and for the insightful answers. And it was such a massive pleasure to talk with you, honestly. And I truly hope that we'll have the opportunity to talk again at some point.
Don't hesitate to reach out if you wanna do this again.
Oh, absolutely. I will. And, if at any point you're looking for creepy destinations to film in Europe, let me know. I have plenty of those.
What part of Europe are you in?
So I'm currently in mainland Europe, so UK and Germany and so on.
Okay, good.
But I'm coming from a Bulgarian family.
Oh, nice.
And the interesting part is that one of my businesses is based in Bulgaria, and my business partner and I own an abandoned school in a very distant village.
Well.
Yeah. And
we may have something in common.
Honestly, it's and I very much related to what you said about the asylum, because when we first went to see the school, because it's a huge building and everything was left off there as it was, as the children were just, in class the day before. So, I was just, we were just scrolling it out, and it was so atmospheric and just heavy, as you mentioned. And the best part is that, as I've said, it's in a very distant village within the mountains, and the school is literally on top of on top of the village, you know?
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, if you want, I can show you even some photos just for the conversation, you know, because I'm sure you would appreciate it. But yeah.
Before we hang up, I'm going to put my email in the chat.
Please do. Yeah, please do.
Well, very awesome. It was a pleasure talking with you. And like I said, don't hesitate to email, reach out. You know, if you want to do this again, or you just want to talk other stuff, it's all good.
Absolutely. I'll definitely do. And again, thank you so much. Have a nice day, and I'll talk to you soon, hopefully.
All right. Take care.